The air in the Bali airport hung thick and warm, carrying the scent of frangipani and possibility. Maya stood at the baggage claim, her modest white linen dress already beginning to stick to her skin. She had chosen it carefully 3 weeks ago in a budget retail store, not because she couldn't afford something more elaborate, but because she knew what the next 5 days would require of her. She would be invisible, and invisibility required the right costume. Her phone buzzed with messages from her cousin Priya. "Where are you? The floral arrangements for the welcome dinner need supervision. The resort's sound system is acting up again. Her mother's breathing medication is in the blue bag. Make sure it gets to the villa before I forget." Maya smiled at her own redundancy. Priya wasn't asking her to be present at the wedding. She was asking her to be everywhere except present. She had become expert at this particular art form over the past 5 years. The taxi ride to the resort took 40 minutes, winding through emerald rice paddies and past temples adorned with offerings. Maya watched the landscape shift from tourist zones to something more authentic, and she felt the familiar ache of longing. Once, before her mother's stroke, before the medical bills, before her cousin's wedding planning business had needed her full-time support, Maya had imagined herself traveling with a camera and a purpose. She had been in film school then, studying documentary cinematography, hungry to tell stories that mattered. The dreams had been vivid and immediate. Now they felt like something she had read in someone else's biography. The resort was exactly as she had imagined, all cream marble and infinity pools that seemed to spill into the ocean itself. Other guests were already arriving, their luggage handled by staff, their bodies draped in couture fabrics that caught the light like prisms. Maya watched a woman in a sapphire silk dress breeze past the reception desk, her heels clicking with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her right to be noticed. Maya adjusted her simple dress and walked toward the staff area. Priya found her within 5 minutes, as if she had been waiting. "Thank God you're here. The florist is having a panic attack about the petal colors. The groom's family from Mumbai are all arriving tonight, and mother's medications got mixed up with the decorative supplies." Priya was beautiful in the way people become beautiful when they are about to get married, glowing from the inside with self-importance and joy. Maya loved her cousin, truly, which was exactly why she didn't mention that these problems could have been prevented with better planning, or that Priya's mother, Maya's aunt, had called her 3 times with the same questions, revealing that no one had actually taken control of the chaos. Instead, Maya said, "Show me the floral situation. We can solve it in an hour." They did. Maya spent the next 2 hours in the flower-decorated pavilion, speaking with the florist in the calm, measured tone that had become her signature. She acknowledged his frustration, praised his artistic vision, and suggested a compromise that would preserve his integrity while meeting Priya's requirements. By the time she left, the florist was sketching new arrangements on a notepad, his panic transformed into creative energy. When she finally reached the villa where she would be staying, the sun had collapsed into the ocean. Her mother was already asleep, her face relaxed in the way it only became when she wasn't fighting through pain. Maya arranged the medications in chronological order, left a note about dosages on the bedside table, and sat on her own narrow bed in the adjoining room. She had brought one book, a documentary about a woman photographer who had spent 40 years capturing war zones and human suffering. On the back cover, the photographer stood in front of the Taj Mahal, her silver hair wild, her eyes holding the kind of light that comes from living fully. Maya had read that back cover so many times it had begun to fray. Instead of opening the book, she lay back and thought about invisibility. There was a particular skill to it, she had learned. If you moved quietly, if you anticipated other people's needs before they voiced them, if you dressed in colors that didn't demand attention, people stopped seeing you. They saw only your utility. And sometimes, Maya thought as she drifted towards sleep, that was the kindest gift you could give someone, to let them believe they were thinking clearly, that they had never needed your help at all. She didn't know yet that there was someone at this wedding who would learn to see her, that there was a man who had spent 5 years invisible too, and that her quiet presence would make him feel, for the first time in longer than he could remember, truly visible. But tonight, she simply slept, the weight of other people's expectations resting easy on her shoulders, the way it always did. The mansion had 13 rooms, though Elena never quite understood why one person needed that many spaces. She'd chosen the smallest bedroom, the yellow one on the east wing, far enough from Dominic's suite that she could breathe, close enough that the staff wouldn't whisper about marital discord. Mrs. Chen, Dominic's housekeeper for the past 15 years, had that particular look in her eyes when Elena first arrived. The knowing look of someone who'd seen many women move through these rooms, each believing they were different, each learning they weren't. "I'll need very little," Elena had told her on that first morning, unpacking the modest suitcase that contained everything she owned. "Breakfast at 7. Tea at 4. I can manage the rest myself." "The master prefers dinner at 8, Mrs. Chen said, watching her unfold a simple grey sweater. "He likes the table set formally, even when it's just the two of you. And he doesn't like to be disturbed in his study after 6. Elena nodded, committing the details to memory as if she was studying a textbook on how to be invisible in her own home. She had learned invisibility young. It was easier than being noticed, easier than being disappointed. For the first month, Dominic barely acknowledged her. He left for the office before she came down to breakfast. He came home around 9, ate the dinner Mrs. Chen had prepared, and retreated to his study. They passed each other like ghosts, polite nods, no words. It was exactly what Elena had asked for. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like drowning in slow motion. The turning point came on a Thursday evening in late September. Elena was in the library, the only room in the mansion that felt genuinely lived in, with worn hardcover spines and dog-eared pages, when Dominic found her. She was reading, curled into the window seat with a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. "You read," he said. Not a question. Elena closed her book carefully. "Yes." "What are you reading?" "The Remains of the Day." He was quiet for a moment, then he asked, "Why that one?" "Because it's about a man who spent his whole life serving someone else's vision," she said, meeting his eyes for the first time in weeks. And by the time he realized he wanted something for himself, there was no one left to want it with. Dominic stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway's amber light, and she saw something shift across his face. Recognition, maybe, or loneliness. She couldn't decide which. "I didn't know you were interested in literature," he said finally. "There's a lot you don't know about me." "Then tell me." But Elena had already turned back to her book, signaling the conversation's end. What she didn't tell him was that Stevens, the butler in the novel, reminded her of herself. A person so devoted to duty that they forgot duty wasn't the same as living. After that night, things changed in small ways. Dominic began coming home earlier. He would sometimes sit in the library while she read, not speaking, just existing in the same space. Elena found herself more aware of his presence, the sound of him turning pages, the way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Mrs. Chen noticed. Elena could tell from the way the older woman lingered when serving tea, the small smile playing at her lips. One afternoon in October, Elena was arranging flowers in the main hallway, something she did weekly, though no one had asked her to, when Dominic stopped to watch. "You're good at that," he said. "My mother taught me," Elena replied, not looking up from the delicate work of balancing stems. "She said flowers are honest. They can't pretend. They just bloom or they don't." "Is that why you like them? Because they're honest?" Elena finally glanced at him. There was something in his expression that made her throat tight. "I like them because they're beautiful for a short time, and then they fade. No expectations. No disappointment. Just grace while it lasts." She'd meant it as a philosophy for survival. Dominic seemed to hear something else entirely. The real rupture came at a charity gala in early November, where they made their first appearance together as a married couple. Elena wore a simple black dress, nothing like the elaborate gowns the other women flaunted. She was meant to be decorative, present but not prominent. It was the perfect camouflage. But then Victoria appeared. Victoria Castellano Wright was Dominic's ex-girlfriend, the kind of beautiful that demanded attention. She moved through the crowd like she owned it, and when she saw Dominic, her face lit with a possession that made Elena's stomach clench. "Darling, I heard you'd gotten married," Victoria said, her hand finding his arm with the familiarity of someone who'd had every right to touch him. "But you didn't mention she was so quiet. Is she even interested in being here?" Elena watched Dominic's jaw tighten, watched him look at Victoria, then at her. Something flickered in his eyes, something that looked like a question. "Elena," he said suddenly, extending his hand. Dance with me. She should have refused. Her boundaries were clear. But something in the way he asked, not commanded, but asked, made her stand and take his hand. He held her closer than necessary on the dance floor, his palm warm against her back. Elena could feel the tension in him, the barely contained frustration. Why do you do that? He asked quietly. Do what? Hide. Even now. Even when you're standing right in front of me, you're somewhere else. Elena looked up at him, and for the first time, she allowed him to really see her. What he found in her eyes wasn't coldness. It was fear. Deep, bone-deep fear of exactly this moment, when someone looked at her and wanted more than she could give. Because wanting things is how you get hurt, she whispered. And Dominic, holding her as the music swelled around them, finally understood that her walls weren't built from indifference. They were built from survival. Which meant they could be unmade. Which meant everything was about to change. The morning after the gala, Elena woke to find a single gardenia on her nightstand. White, perfect, exactly the kind of gesture that made her chest ache. She didn't need to wonder who'd left it. Dominic was the only person in the house who would have that kind of intention. She placed it in water without allowing herself to enjoy it. Enjoyment was surrender. But the gesture didn't stop. Every morning, a new flower. Not roses. Dominic seemed to understand that flowers that demanded attention would only make her retreat further. Instead, he left simple things. A magnolia. A lily of the valley. Once, just a sprig of eucalyptus that smelled like clarity. Elena began to feel hunted. Kindness, she realized, was a trap. It made you believe things could be different. It made you hope. By the second week, she couldn't take it anymore. She found him in his study late one evening, surrounded by the blueprints and code that occupied most of his waking hours. He looked up when she entered, and she saw it immediately, the question in his eyes, the hope he was trying to contain. You need to stop, she said without preamble. Stop what? The flowers. The lingering looks. The way you've started having dinner with me. You're creating expectations. Dominic set down his pen deliberately, as if grounding himself. What if I want to create expectations? Then you're being selfish. Perhaps I am. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin feel paper-thin. Tell me something, Elena. When you made this contract with me, did you ever consider that someone might actually fall in love with you? No, she said flatly. Because I made certain that was impossible. Did you? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems quite possible. It seems, in fact, inevitable. He stood now, moving toward her with the same careful precision she'd seen him use in the library. Slow, patient, giving her time to flee. But she didn't flee. That was the problem. I think you made rules because you were terrified. Not of me. Of yourself. You don't know anything about me. I know you read novels about men who wait too long to choose their own lives. I know you arrange flowers with the same care someone might use to pray. I know you've set your life into such a narrow space that there's barely room to breathe, and yet you keep making it smaller. He was close now, close enough that she could see the exhaustion beneath his determination. Why? What happened that convinced you love isn't worth the risk? Elena felt something cracking open inside her chest, like thin ice beneath her weight. She wanted to leave. She should have left. Instead, she found herself sitting on the edge of his desk, suddenly too tired to stand. My mother loved my father, she said quietly. Completely. He was everything to her. And then he left. Not dramatically, he just slowly became someone else until one day she didn't recognize him. And she spent the rest of her life trying to shrink herself smaller and smaller, hoping if she took up less space, he might come back. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. She died trying to be small enough for his love. I promised myself I would never do that. Dominic was silent for a long moment. Then he sat beside her, not touching, just present. That's not love, he said finally. That's erasure. But you know that, don't you? You know the difference. You just don't believe anyone would choose differently. Because people don't, she said bitterly. People always choose themselves. I'm choosing you, he said it as simply as stating fact. I'm choosing to stay even when you push me away. I'm choosing to see you even when you try to hide. And I'll keep choosing that, every day, until you believe me. That's not fair, Elena said, and her voice broke. You can't choose this. You can't choose me like this. Why not? Because then I have to choose too. And if I choose you and you leave, she couldn't finish. Couldn't articulate the fear that lived in her bones. Then we'll both face it, Dominic said. But at least we'll face it together. At least you'll have lived while you had the chance. Elena looked at her hands. One of them still held the gardenia she'd taken from her room, the white petals just beginning to brown at the edges. Temporary. Fragile. Honest. I don't know if I can do this, she said. I know, Dominic replied. That's why we'll do it slowly. One day at a time. One flower at a time. Until you believe that some things don't fade just because you're afraid of them. The letter arrived on a grey Tuesday morning, forwarded by Sebastian. Elena recognized her mother's handwriting immediately, the careful, precise script of someone who'd always been afraid of taking up too much space, even with her words. She found Dominic in the garden, which had become his habit on weekend mornings. He was reading the financial news, but he set it aside when he saw her face. He always did that now, abandoned whatever he was doing to attend to her. My mother wrote to me, Elena said, sitting beside him on the stone bench. Years ago. Sebastian kept it. He thought I should read it now. Dominic waited. He was learning the language of her silences. Elena unfolded the letter with trembling hands and read aloud. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means Sebastian finally felt brave enough to give this to you. I need you to understand something that took me a lifetime to learn, far too late. Love is not supposed to require that you disappear. I spent 43 years trying to be small enough for your father to keep loving me, and in doing so, I forgot to love myself. Don't make my mistake. Don't teach yourself that devotion means destruction. If you ever love someone, fight for the right to be fully yourself within that love. The greatest gift I can leave you is this warning. A love that asks you to erase yourself is not love. It's imprisonment wearing a beautiful name. Elena's voice broke. She had to stop reading. Dominic took the letter gently from her hands and held it while she cried, not the quiet tears she usually allowed herself, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere very old and very hurt. She knew, Elena whispered. She knew what she was doing to herself, and she couldn't stop. And she knew what she was doing to me, teaching me that this was what love meant. And she tried to warn me from beyond death. Dominic said nothing. He simply held her, his hand steady on her back, grounding her. When the tears finally subsided, Elena felt hollowed out. But also, strangely, lighter. As if she'd been carrying her mother's unfinished grief all these years, and finally, she was allowed to set it down. I've been so angry at her, Elena said. For being weak. For letting him do that to her. But she wasn't weak. She was just trapped by her own fear. The same fear I've been trapped by. You're not trapped, Dominic said quietly. You're choosing to walk out. Over the following weeks, everything shifted. Elena began to emerge from the careful structure she'd built. She laughed at dinner, real laughter, not the polite performance she'd been practicing. She told Dominic stories about her childhood, about Sebastian, about the girl she'd been before she learned that wanting things was dangerous. Sebastian, visiting on a Sunday afternoon, pulled Dominic aside while Elena was in the kitchen. Thank you, Sebastian said simply. For what? For loving my sister the way she needed to be loved. Not the way she asked to be loved, but the way she actually needed. He paused, then added, she's different now. Lighter. Like she's finally allowed herself to breathe. Dominic nodded, understanding that this was as close to approval as Sebastian could manage. The boy, now a young man, cancer-free for 18 months, had his sister's careful way of showing affection through observance rather than effusion. One evening, Elena found herself in Dominic's study while he worked. She settled into the leather chair by the window, reading, and neither of them felt the need to speak. This had become their rhythm, a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who've learned they don't need constant reassurance of each other's presence. Around midnight, Dominic finally closed his laptop. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I was wrong," Elena said. "About the contract. About all of it." "About what specifically?" "I thought if I didn't hope, I couldn't be disappointed. But I was disappointed the whole time, in myself. Because I was living a life that wasn't actually a life. I was existing. Just like Stevens in that book. Just like my mother. And I didn't even realize it until you wouldn't let me." Dominic moved to sit beside her. "Are you saying you're giving up the contract?" Elena turned to face him. "I'm saying I want to renegotiate." "On what terms?" "On the terms that we try being honest with each other. Completely. No walls. No rules designed to keep ourselves safe. Just two people willing to be destroyed if necessary, because the alternative is never being fully alive." She took his hand. "I'm terrified. But I'm more terrified of going back to that half-life where nothing could touch me." Dominic brought her hand to his chest, over his heart. "This is yours," he said. "It's been yours since the library. You just didn't know it yet." Elena felt the beat beneath her palm, steady, real, alive. It was the moment she'd been afraid of her entire life, the moment of complete vulnerability, of choosing someone and trusting they wouldn't leave, of being fully seen and loved anyway. It was nothing like she'd expected. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely necessary. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Dominic said, "we learn to love each other the way your mother wanted you to. As equals. As people who make each other bigger, not smaller." 6 months later, Elena stood in the backyard of the mansion, her hands deep in soil that Dominic had imported specifically for this project. The garden, once a manicured, controlled space, was being transformed into something wild and beautiful. She planted gardenias and magnolias alongside roses she would have forbidden herself to want. She planted jasmine that would climb the new trellis Dominic had built. She created a space that was both fragile and resilient, beautiful because it was alive enough to require constant attention. "You're going to get dirty," Dominic said, emerging from the house with a glass of iced tea. He was smiling in that way he did now, the smile that reached his eyes, that asked for nothing but presence. "I'm already dirty," Elena replied, not looking up from the seedlings she was arranging. "And I'm going to get dirtier." He laughed and settled onto the stone bench, the same one where she'd read her mother's letter 6 months ago. The bench where everything had cracked open and started healing. Sebastian and his girlfriend had visited the previous weekend. The cancer was gone now, truly gone, the threat finally becoming memory. Elena's family home had been saved, restored, transformed into something she could actually live in again if she chose. But she didn't choose to return. She'd chosen to stay here, in the mansion that no longer felt like a cage. "Mrs. Chen wants to know if you're coming in for lunch," Dominic called out. "In 20 minutes, Elena replied. "I want to finish these sections." What struck her most about her life now was how ordinary it had become. Not in a disappointing way, but in the most profound way possible. She could be fully herself, messy, ambitious, scared sometimes, hopeful always, and Dominic loved all of it. Not despite her complexity, but because of it. The contract had been dissolved officially 3 months ago. Their marriage was no longer a transaction but a choice. They renewed it every day, in small moments, in the way Dominic brought her tea while she worked, in the way Elena had started cooking dinner with him instead of simply arranging it, in the vulnerability of falling asleep beside someone and trusting they would still be there in the morning. One evening, Elena asked Dominic about Victoria. "She got married," he said simply, "to someone who actually loves her. Apparently, they're very happy. Do you regret it? Choosing me instead of someone more appropriate?" Dominic pulled her close, his mouth against her hair. "No, because you taught me something she never could have. You taught me that love isn't about having someone beautiful on your arm. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be better, braver, more honest. And then choosing that person, day after day, even when it's difficult." Sebastian had said something similar when Elena asked him how he'd known that Dominic was different. Because he didn't try to fix you, Sebastian had replied. He just loved you while you fixed yourself. There's a difference between someone who wants to change you and someone who believes in who you could become. The night of Elena's 28th birthday, Dominic surprised her with something entirely unexpected. He'd had her mother's letter professionally framed. It hung now in their bedroom, not as a symbol of trauma, but as a testament to the journey it had catalyzed. So you never forget, Dominic had said. Where you came from, why you were afraid, and what you chose to become. By autumn of that year, Elena had started teaching again. Not as a substitute, but as a permanent member of faculty at a private academy. She taught art history and painting, and she discovered that she'd been storing up creativity during all those years of emotional hibernation. It poured out of her now, rich, complex, informed by her own understanding of what it meant to finally be alive. One of her students created a painting of a woman in a garden, surrounded by flowers. When Elena saw it, she wept. "That's you," the student said shyly. "You inspire me because you look happy. Actually happy, not the fake kind teachers usually do." Standing in her garden on an evening in November, 1 year after the letter, Elena thought about that comment. She was happy. Dangerously, vulnerably, completely happy. The kind of happy that came from believing you deserved to take up space in the world. Dominic joined her as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "The gardenias are blooming," he observed. "Yes. And they'll fade, like everything does," Elena said. "But they'll come back next year. And in the meantime, they're beautiful." "Like you," Dominic replied. She would have once found that sentiment too tender, too risky. But now she simply leaned her head against his shoulder and allowed herself to be seen, to be loved, to be fully, completely alive. The contract that had begun as survival had become transformation. The walls that had protected her from pain had been dismantled, brick by brick, until there was nothing left but open space. Space for Dominic to love her, space for her to love herself, space for her mother's legacy to finally rest. In the distance, Sebastian was laughing with his girlfriend, and Mrs. Chen was closing the kitchen windows as the evening grew cool. The mansion that had once felt cold was now filled with the sound of actual life. And in the garden, the flowers grew wild and beautiful and temporary, teaching the oldest lesson, that the most meaningful things in life are the ones we allow ourselves to need. Life lesson. The final chapter shows that healing is not a destination but a practice. Elena's transformation is ongoing. She gardens, she teaches, she loves, she lives. The profound truth woven throughout is this: we cannot protect ourselves from pain without also protecting ourselves from joy. Growth requires vulnerability. And the people who love us best are not those who make us safe, but those who make us brave. The garden becomes a metaphor for life itself, something that requires constant tending, something that withers in isolation, something that becomes beautiful precisely because it's alive enough to be fragile.